our weekly visit with our good friend, Peter King, Odyssey NFL Insider. Hello, Peter. Good afternoon.
Willard and Dibs. It's the most wonderful time of the week because I'm on the phone with you guys.
Oh, my gosh.
Man.
We're going to save that, okay,
that
Peter?
was incredible.
Please do it. You know what that should be? That should be, even though nobody even listens to voicemail anymore, that ought to be your voicemail greeting.
If you were on Cameo, I would have paid $100 for that. That's all, Peter.
See, and I think all people do is listen to voicemail now.
I'll tell you what you can do. You can get George Santos. He's on Cameo.
That's so great.
Yes,
He's a much bigger name than me.
And he's got more free time than you too,
yes,
Peter.
He does. Yeah, speaking of free time, where did you spend your weekend? Where were you this weekend, Peter?
Well, I actually was in Pittsburgh. I'm doing a story for NBC for Football Night in America on holiday weekend, on Christmas weekend. We have two games on December 23rd, Bengals Steelers and Bills Chargers. So NBC a few months ago said, hey, you may have to do like a holiday story, kind of a good news story that night on a player in one of those two games. And so I just thought, man, I got to do Cam Hayward. Cam Hayward on the Steelers, he's Ironhead Hayward's son. For those of a certain age, you all know who Ironhead Hayward is, but he was a huge, big, 265-pound running back, fullback, and his boy, Cam Hayward, is now the elder statesman on the Pittsburgh Steelers, trying to save the world throughout Pittsburgh. So I hung around with him for a couple days last week. So that was my weekend. Then I went home and I watched all the games from here, and I got totally taken in by the Buffalo-Kansas City game, which was tremendously fun. And I must say I didn't get quite as upset as Mahomes or Reed. But anyway, it was sort of a normal week watching Red Zone and watching all the games last weekend.
Yeah, and what a fantastic weekend it was. And we'll get to the Niners in your thoughts in just a moment. But can we talk just briefly about Kadarius Toney and lining up offsides? Are you surprised at the firestorm of emotion that came out of a guy blatantly lining up in the neutral zone?
Well, 10 years ago, I ran this website at Sports Illustrated called the MMQB, and one of the big stories I did there was a 16,000-word, 3-part story on a week in the life of an officiating crew. And one of the things I talked about with Gene Steratore and his crew, Steratore obviously now retired from officiating, and he works on CBS. But one of the things that Steratore and I discussed at great length was how officials talk to on the field and help teams, coaches, players, because as he said, we don't want to call fouls. We want to make sure they're not called. We want guys to do things the right way. And he said early in games, very often the side judge, down judge, back judge, whatever, the ref will communicate with players and coaches about, hey, don't do this. I see you're a little bit, in the neutral zone, make sure you stay back, whatever. But after a while, you're not talking like that anymore. The game goes on and you're just reffing the game. And I have not heard of an officiating crew warning people in the last minute of the game with the game on the line. Hey, you're a little offside here. Don't do that. I mean, so I have not heard of that before. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I think I know a few things about officiating and how they work. I was never aware that this was done. I think the one other thing I would say is that we all saw Patrick Mahomes go absolutely bat crap, and which he never does. He's never, ever done that before. And Andy Reid has never talked in a snide way after games. He's always, even after tough losses, he understands it's part of the job. got to talk to the press and everything. But both those guys, you could tell, were really angry after the game. And my whole point is that I would bet, this is my bet, okay, Patrick Mahomes never saw that play when he was on the field going crazy. He didn't see it. He could not see Kadarius Toney. He wasn't maybe offside. He was incredibly offside.
Right.
Yep.
And so it's not a penalty you ever hear called very much at all, but you can't ignore that. And so, I don't know, that's kind of the way I looked at it.
Yep, and I think everybody agreed to the point where Mahomes came out today and expressed some regret over the whole thing. Peter King is joining us here on 95.7 The Game. Straight from your column, Peter, in talking about the win that the Cowboys had over the Eagles, you're talking about Dak Prescott and said after the Cowboys lost to the 49ers, there were 3 lingering scars. 1, Dallas can't win the big one. 2, Prescott can't win the big one. 3, the Niners have Dallas's number. After beating the Eagles, is one of those 3 still potentially true?
Until such time that the Dallas Cowboys beat the 49ers. And, until such time that the Cowboys play well in the clutch in those games. Those are the 2 big things. Until such time, I will continue to think that, the 49ers have their number. Now, the Cowboys are a little bit of a different team. Dak Prescott's a little bit of a different quarterback. When I watch Dak Prescott today, he is playing with confidence that I don't think he played with even as recently as week 5 of this season, when the 49ers beat Dallas by 32 points. But I'm not saying he's a totally different player, but he's a different player now. And he's the kind of player who I think has got a chance to erase all the bad stuff that had been said about him, written about him, and all that. But the fact is, he's got to go out and do it. That was the first, I would say, huge win, certainly of this year, that Dallas has had, in a game they absolutely had to have. Those are the games that they have been losing, and they needed, for their own psyche, I believe, to win that game. And now, look, Dallas, I think, is a legitimate threat. I think it's a three-headed monster atop the NFC, with Detroit being 4. But to me, the three-headed monster, the leader in that pack, without any question, is San Francisco.
Having beaten both Philly and Dallas already this year, and in terms of leader of the pack in the MVP race, it feels like it's Brock Purdy. You told us last week that you thought Brock was the leader, but does Dak have a unique opportunity to kind of knife into that lead with a game at Buffalo and a game at Miami and then prime time against Detroit? Does the schedule help Dak in his quest for MVP?
If Dak sweeps the next 3, my gut feeling is he probably will win MVP. That's my gut feeling because, and he's got to play well, obviously. They can't be fluky. Just because I think that would be so unexpected. Now, I don't think the 49ers have a cake schedule the rest of the way, with Baltimore on Christmas Eve, at home. They're going to have some challenges, but I think Dak is going to have a much tougher road. Now, the 2 other things I would say about the MVP, obviously it changes week to week. But you know what I think was the most significant thing that happened this week in the MVP race is that the Dallas Cowboys beat Philadelphia. Dak played well, made a couple of huge throws in that game, so that helped him. However, I think something that was almost as significant happened last night, and it happened in Miami. When Tyreek Hill went out early in that game with an ankle injury, he did come back later, sparingly. But when he was knocked out early in that game, you saw over the next couple of quarters exactly how valuable Tyreek Hill is to the Miami Dolphins. I would never say, I'd very rarely say on a good team that someone else other than the quarterback is the MVP. But didn't Tyreek Hill last night show evidence that, when he isn't in the lineup, that's a B- offense. And when he's in there, it's an A to A+ offense. So I think Tyreek Hill, by virtue almost of his injury and what happened without him on the field, I think he improved his chances to win MVP last night.
That is a really interesting statement, and I also wonder how you think that affects the candidacy of Brock Purdy, in that many have a similar perception with this team, say if McCaffrey was out, or like we saw when Debo and Trent were out.
I think all those things are arguable, and in no way would I ever say that they're meaningless. Everything is meaningful, okay? But I think the other point I would look at right now is that I think one of the things that you can't really underestimate. Now, I was looking at this Monday when I knew I was going to have to talk about this quite a bit. But I think for people who are not like real stat nerds, the one stat for all the quarterbacks that is clearly, easily, unequivocally the most impressive statistic that any quarterback in the league has this year is that Brock Purdy is averaging 9.9 yards per pass attempt. And just to make you understand exactly what that means, just understand that it means that every time Brock Purdy cocks his arm and lets go of the football, the equivalent of a first down happens. And that is an amazing statistic. And I don't care if you're throwing to Jerry Rice, Lance Allworth, Raymond Berry, Randy Moss, and Tyreek Hill, and Deebo Samuel. I don't care. Whoever you're throwing to, you've got to make the throws. You got to complete the passes. So that's one thing. And the second thing I would say is that, if you look at the way Brock Purdy is played, and, I think everybody wants to equivocate about Brock Purdy and wants to say, well, he did this, he did that, but what about this, what about that? There's a lot of whataboutism with Purdy. The fact is, since they have started really putting distance between themselves and the rest of the league, the way I look at it is this: in their 5-game winning streak, they have played on the road against 3 teams that at the time were all easily, clearly, well, maybe except for Seattle, but they all appeared to be playoff teams, okay? At Jacksonville, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. At Seattle, 1-1. At Philadelphia, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. I mean, this is a guy who has risen to the occasion when you need to rise to the occasion. In the 5-game winning streak, his completion percentage is 74, and he is at 11 yards per attempt, 11 something, I think. It's just, he's doing things. I don't care what you say about the talent around him. He's doing things that other quarterbacks this year and in recent years have not done. So I would continue to say, if I had a vote today at this moment, I'd vote for Purdy. But let's see what happens in the next 4 games.
It's going to be fascinating, especially as you mentioned about Dak and the schedule he has coming up. Brock Purdy, 3rd in the league in yards, 22nd in pass attempts, which underscores what you were talking about in terms of yards per attempt. Lost in all the Brock Purdy MVP conversation is a defense that continues to play at an elite level. Is it that side of the ball, Peter, that gives them maybe a better chance of going deep into January and maybe even February?
Unless, you remember, we were talking about this just right at the time of the Chase Young trade. And, I remember we obviously, when you look at a team and how a team plays, over a period of time, in that 3-game losing streak, and I'm going from memory here, but in that 3-game streak, they were allowing close to 395 yards a game, and they were playing teams that at the time, were not, with the exception of Cincinnati, were certainly not premier teams. But in the last 5 games, when you look at it, they are down. And again, I haven't figured this out, but I was looking at it on Monday, and I said they're like 150 yards a game less that they're surrendering over the last 5 games. And I think one other thing that really is impressive about what they're doing on defense is that everybody looks at what they're doing and how they're rushing the passer and everything, but as impressive to me, or maybe more so, is that teams can't run on them. And nobody has run on them in the last 5 weeks. So, everybody thinks of, okay, you're getting sacks, you're getting turnovers, you're doing this. I mean, yeah, they're doing well in that category, but as impressive is that it's always 2nd and 8, 2nd and 9, 3rd and 7. And that is what makes a defense great. The fact that every time on almost every series against you, teams are in long yardage situations.
Peter King with us here on Willard and Dibs. Peter, you referenced a couple of minutes ago the 49ers separating themselves from the rest of the league. In your words, how big is that separation?
I think right now, if I were to rank the teams, I would say it's San Francisco number 1, and it's probably Dallas number 2, and it's probably 5 or 6 points difference right now. And then right after that, I would think would be Baltimore. Philadelphia's defense really worries me. I mean, it's amazing what's happened the last 3 games. They're giving up 36 points a game the last 3 games. And as if that's not bad enough, get this, their opponents in the last 3 games have had 30 possessions, and they've scored on 19 of them.
Oof.
That's like an expansion team. Their defense has really crashed and burned recently. And if they don't do something about that, they're not going to be in the playoffs for very long. But having said all that, they got time, and they have an advantageous schedule. I said earlier today to somebody that there are 2 crazy statements you can make right now about the NFL season. One, it is December 12th, and Kansas City has a 1-game lead over Denver for AFC West supremacy. That's crazy. 2, the road to the NFC East Championship very well could go through Tommy DeVito.
Oh.
And the reason that that's the case is that Philadelphia, 2 of the last 4 games are against the Giants. Now, I live in Brooklyn. I raised my kids in Montclair, New Jersey, my wife and I. And the neighboring town to ours was Cedar Grove, New Jersey. That is where Tommy DeVito is from. That's where he's living in his parents' house, with his mother still doing his laundry, with his mother making his bed. And how about a starting NFL quarterback with a 3-game winning streak leaves the house every morning and his mother goes into his room, takes his laundry, washes it, makes his bed and prepares for him to come home, and she makes chicken cacciatore. I mean, this is one of the weirder stories we've ever heard in a while. But last night, he drove the New York Giants for the third consecutive week. He won a game, and this against a decent team in Green Bay, and he drove them down to the winning field goal to win it on the last play of the game. And I'm not saying the Giants are going to beat Philadelphia in either of those two games, but weird stuff is going on right now on both the Eagles and on the Giants. If the Giants somehow, some way manage to eke out one of those wins, the Philadelphia Eagles could be the 5th seed coming into the playoffs. Now, I don't think that's going to happen because Dallas's schedule is impossible. But it's amazing what has happened in the last 3 or 4 weeks where somebody none of us have ever heard of, Tommy DeVito, and now they could knock the Eagles out of the division title. But I would see Dallas being number 2 right now with a little bit of a margin, and then probably Baltimore, maybe Philly, Detroit, Miami. The one team I think that will be heard from, because I think they're going to make the playoffs and they won't be an easy out, is the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah,
I'm shocked to say that, but that's a good team.
Week 18 against the Niners. Tommy Cutlet's maybe the greatest nickname in NFL history. I mean, and I had chicken cacciatore Sunday night. It's a delicious dinner. Peter, so many more questions, but I'll save them for next week because, we're up against it.
Hey, good to talk to you guys, and we'll talk next week.
Sounds good. There it goes. Yep, absolutely. Thanks so much, Peter. There it is. Odyssey NFL insider Peter King.